So the exciting thing about the stromatolites is just the top layer is living. And what you have is a bacteria that precurses our cyanobacteria. You have a photosynthesizing bacteria that basically is going to be giving off oxygen, and this would be the beginning of our oxygen atmosphere with these particular organisms. What happens is it lays down formations, so dead, decomposing species formations in very, very predictable layers, and that's what these mounds become. So we have, and like I said, you have these still in Australia, and then you have fossilized records of them also in Australia where they've been found. They may be elsewhere, but they just haven't been found there. So the fossilized records, you can look at these, but you can also see them and compare them to living ones that exist even now. And the thing about the oxygen that they are secreting, it is so at that time, again, we're talking about 3.5 billion years ago, it's so little that the oxygen that is being secreted by these organisms is being taken in via iron. So we have layers of rock that have been oxidized by of iron that's been oxidized, turned red, and we can see this red rock. And it's part of the charm of Australia is you have all this red rock all over the place, and you have red rock elsewhere. But the oxygen was not enough at this time, even though these are photosynthesizing organisms. Not enough oxygen, nothing compared to what we have now. But we do have a record of the fact that these organisms existed. They were photosynthesizing, and also the record of where the oxygen went. Most of the atmospheric oxygen is of biological origin, is because of the rise of plants, photosynthesizing plants. This is the beginning of that origin, I guess you might say. The revolution happened about 2.7 to 2.3 billion years ago with the extinction of prokaryotic groups. So as I said, mass extinctions generally lead to the rise of other species that fill in the gaps. And what happened is we had ancient cyanobacteria. This is something we're familiar with. They had the capacity to photosynthesize and then cause oxygen levels to increase dramatically. This increase in oxygen levels then gave rise to eukaryotic cells containing chloroplasts, and then something more familiar to what we recognize now. And with regard to these eukaryotic cells, remember they're larger, tend to be larger multicellular organisms. Back to 2.1 billion years, ancestors of mitochondria and plastids probably went into a host cell. We've talked about this a little bit as undigested prey, and then you had this interdependent relationship between host and internal parasite. So mitochondria probably were ingested in this concept of endosymbionts. So came in, felt protected, and just stayed there. And then, of course, have evolved with the organisms. We feel that this happened with mitochondria first, and then chloroplasts. So the plastids, so mitochondria, then the plastids came in that had the ability to photosynthesize through these endosymbiotic events. There is evidence of supporting this endosymbiosis. The inner membranes are similar to plasma membranes of prokaryotes. So our inner membranes of our mitochondria and plastids are similar to what we've seen as plasma membranes in prokaryotes. So we're looking at that as evidence that this is the process that took place. There are also some similarities between organelles of prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So, and we have looked at this when we looked at the bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes, and we looked at the fact that archaea shares some properties with bacteria and some with eukaryotes. Well, the same thing is true with prokaryotes. Remember, these are the non-membrane bound organelle area, but their membranes, so their plasma membranes are similar, and some of the DNA, their ribosomes are similar to prokaryotes than eukaryotic ribosomes. So you have a similarity in this sequence of evolution between prokaryotes and then also eukaryotes. So you had kind of a ladder of how did this change. The evolution of eukaryotes, as I said, allowed for many, a greater range of unicellular forms, and then the second wave of diversification occurred when multicellular organisms, eukaryotic organisms, evolved, gave rise to algae, plants, fungi, and animals, particularly these algae, where it really revolutionized the atmosphere. Cambrian is the era or the eon that we associate with animal life. It looks like I cut off an end, so the Cambrian explosion refers to the time period where we have fossils that resemble modern animals. Sorry, I tried to make my picture as big as possible. I cut some of the letters off. Cambrian period is from 535 to 525 million years ago. The Cambrian explosion provides evidence of our first predatory-prey interactions. As far as we know, there were none, and what that does, the reason that, I mean, that's very interesting, but that really causes a whole new parameter to adaptability. So you had many species changing because of this prey predator interactions. We think of one of the organisms, very ancient organisms, developing this exoskeleton because of it. Very less likely would be eaten if it had a hard shell. So some of it is some of our evolution is that adaptation too. Not only adaptation with regard to the environment, finding food, being able to reproduce, but also adaptation living long enough to be able to reproduce. And then there is new evidence coming out all the time that maybe animals came before the Cambrian explosion, but that is more in the, I guess maybe they're working on that realm. Cambrian is the word you want to remember and associate that with the rise of animals. In terms of about 5 million years ago, that's when plants and animals began to colonize land. And some of these, remember, some of these are key concepts. So general concepts you want to have in your head. So about 5 million years ago is when land began to be colonized. And vascular plants about 420 million years ago. The plants today form mutually beneficial associations, so between plant and fungi. Remember, plants are the photosynthesizing. They're creating this oxygen using the carbon dioxide. But fungi also are very important with regard to plants, because many times fungi create the beneficial soils for the plants. Arthropods and pteropods, among many other things that fungi do in the positive and also somewhat in the negative. Arthropods and pteropods are most widely spread diverse animals, and pteropods evolved from lobe-finned fishes. Pteropods we've talked about before. First land one of the first land animals we associate with terrestrial. They evolved from lobed fin fishes, and so they left the water, came to the land. Another thing that was happening at the same time with regard to Earth is that the tectonic plates are moving. If you ever have a chance, take a class in the history of Earth. But they find that we went from a black planet where you had all this volcanic action going on to a gray planet where you had some of the fallout from the organic action, to actually more of a red planet where it was very, very, where you had this oxidizing going on from the oxygen that's being created. And then you had what's known as a white planet, because we have at least two eras we know of where you had glaciers covering the entire planet. Still had all this volcanic action happening underneath, but glaciers covering the entire surface of the planet. They then broke up, and then you started having these land masses underneath. Land masses then changed into the green planet, but these land masses are constantly moving. So the only prehistoric, I guess, name for land masses is just one that we have, but there are that we're learning, and that's Pangaea. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that properly. But there were several other before that, so these tectonic plates are constantly moving. And sometimes the mass movement of the tectonic plates have caused or attributed to mass extinctions. About 1 billion years ago, formed as a supercontinent, 600 million years ago, and 250 million years ago reformed in this supercontinent. The crust is composed of tectonic plates that are just floating on this mantle of very hot lava. The tectonic plates slowly move through this process of continental drift, and interactions, particularly if they collide or they slide past each other. This is when we have earthquakes, and earthquakes can be very devastating, can form mountains, islands, and also can cause volcanoes to erupt. There you have the word Pangaea. I think I tried to put an extra "ana." Pangaea. Supercontinent 250 million years ago, and this is the one that we tend to study because you have things like the Galapagos Islands, or animals that you see in Australia that you see very, very similar species in South America. So it gives us the idea that at one time these land masses were all one, or at one time there must have been a bridge between the land masses that we don't see now. So the shifting of these tectonic plates again changed the depth of the oceans, made shallow habitats, made microclimates cooler and drier. Also, separation of masses of lands led to allopatric speciation. So think of the two types of squirrels on either side of the Grand Canyon. That would be an isolation. They would not be able to interbreed because of geography. And that's what this allopatric speciation is. And we see this in the fossils, the distribution of the fossils, again between South America, Africa, and other continents. 5 mass extinction events that we're keeping in our head. Mass extinction, and I've kind of been talking about this all the way through the whole thing. Mass extinctions can be caused by changes in atmosphere, can cause changes in atmosphere or environment, or you can have great events taking place like volcanic events or earthquakes. We'll pick this up on the next one.